The year is 2025. In a world obsessed with power and resources, one frozen island becomes the unlikely center of a global storm. As President Trump roars from Capitol Hill, "We will annex one way or another," the world holds its breath. But what unfolds next isn't the American conquest he imagined. Behind the scenes, in quiet boardrooms stretching from Ottawa to Brussels, a silent coup takes shape. Canada, often overlooked, always underestimated, is about to deliver one of the most masterful geopolitical maneuvers in recent history. Massive deposits of rare earths, critical minerals, and Arctic oil, once thought to fall under American control, now slip into the hands of a new alliance. NATO trembles. The Pentagon and Washington suddenly realizes they've been outplayed on their own chessboard. How did Canada pull off this stunning victory? What does it mean for the fragile balance of power in the Arctic and for the world? Stay with us as we dive deep into one of the most high-stakes geopolitical gambits of the 21st century. The Arctic chessboard, how Canada outmaneuvered the US in Greenland. In March 2025, a move few saw coming dramatically reshaped the geopolitics of the Arctic. While President Donald Trump returned to the White House determined to finally fulfill one of his most bizarre ambitions, annexing Greenland, it was Canada, of all players, that seized the initiative and rewired the Arctic's balance of power. Trump, in one of his most bombastic speeches to Congress, declared, "We will annex Greenland to the United States one way or another." His administration revived long-dormant Cold War-era documents envisioning American strategic control over Greenland's icy expanse. But while Trump projected confidence, behind closed doors, his National Security Council and the Pentagon knew this was no longer a simple chess match. Greenland's mineral wealth, critical for 21st century technologies and defense industries, had drawn the attention of multiple global players. The Arctic had become a crowded board. The hidden prize, Greenland's critical minerals. For decades, the Arctic was frozen not only in climate, but in diplomacy, peripheral, largely peaceful, and dominated by long-standing alliances. But recent surveys revealed Greenland sitting atop a geological treasure chest, 38 billion tons of rare earth elements, massive graphite and zirconium reserves, significant niobium deposits, and up to 17 billion barrels of Arctic oil. These resources are indispensable for modern technologies, electric vehicles, hypersonic weapons, nuclear reactors, and renewable energy systems. Suddenly, this frozen landmass became the most contested mineral frontier on Earth. While Trump publicly framed Greenland as a matter of national security, emphasizing radar gaps that could conceal Russian submarines, the true driver was economic security. Missouri Senator Josh Hawley captured the sentiment. "If we don't mine these resources, Beijing will find a way to mine them." Canada's quiet, brilliant countermove. In Washington, plans for overt acquisition gained populist traction. But Copenhagen and Nuuk swiftly rebuffed any suggestion that Greenland was for sale, with the Danish government warning that any coercive action would fracture NATO's unity. Enter Canada. While the US rattled sabers, Ottawa played a far subtler game. Two Canadian companies, Greenland Resources Inc. and Amaroq Minerals, quietly built financial partnerships with European investors. Greenland Resources secured $3 billion for a rare earth mining operation with backing from the European Investment Bank and Denmark's Export Credit Agency. Amaroq Minerals, leveraging London's speculative gold fever, drew in British pension funds and even Norwegian sovereign wealth money to revive gold mining operations shelved since the early 2000s. These weren't just private sector deals, they were geopolitical masterstrokes. Canada, Denmark, and the EU created the $3.1 billion Arctic Green Transition Fund, a multilateral financial mechanism that excluded American control entirely. Greenland now had the capital it needed, free from Washington's influence. The EU's strategic bet on Greenland. At the heart of Europe's interest lies the EU Critical Raw Materials Act, passed in 2023. Facing an increasingly fragile global supply chain, Brussels mandated that at least 25% of critical minerals consumed in Europe must originate from allied, environmentally compliant sources. Greenland fit perfectly into this new doctrine. Its partnership with Canada not only met environmental standards, but also offered stability and shared revenue models, unlike the unpredictable nationalism emanating from Washington. The Greenland Parliament's new infrastructure phallic law sealed the deal. Local employment quotas increased to 70%, and 10% of mining profits would go into Greenland's future fund, modeled after New Zealand's successful Maui model. This was more than resource extraction, it was sustainable nation-building. The U.S. scrambles as supply chains shudder. Washington found itself unexpectedly cornered. The Inflation Reduction Act had tied U.S. electric vehicle tax breaks to domestic battery production, failing to account for Greenland's resources flowing elsewhere. Suddenly, molybdenum, critical for hypersonic weapons, high-strength steel, and nuclear reactors, shifted from medium to high-risk status on Pentagon supply lists. Defense contractors panicked. Lockheed Martin postponed hypersonic weapons testing. Raytheon began scrambling for alternative sources in Australia and Chile. The realization hit hard. The U.S. might lose not just Greenland's minerals, but its technological edge. NATO phrase as Canada leads Europe's Arctic pivot. Even within NATO, fault lines deepened. Norway stood firmly with Denmark, France strengthened its Arctic military patrols, and Germany quietly began diversifying away from U.S. LNG dependency by exploring Canadian Greenland LNG routes. France even sent the nuclear submarine Suffren to Baffin Bay under the guise of Arctic research. Inside the U.S. Congress, opposition to Trump's heavy-handed Greenland obsession grew louder. Alaskan Senator Lisa Murkowski warned that armed intervention risked both environmental catastrophe and NATO disintegration. Democratic senators from Maine and Vermont argued for a consensus-based multilateral mining agreement, fearing that pushing Canada and the EU closer together would permanently erode U.S. leadership in the Arctic. Canada's masterclass in middle power diplomacy. What makes Canada's strategy so impressive is its deft use of middle power leverage. Rather than directly confront the U.S., Ottawa built a transatlantic economic bridge that tied Greenland's future to European industry and Canadian investment, all while preserving NATO's formal unity. In doing so, it protected its own interests in the Northwest Passage, checked U.S. ambitions, and earned enormous goodwill in Brussels. At the same time, by establishing indigenous revenue-sharing models and local employment guarantees, Greenland's leadership solidified its autonomy, gaining bargaining power in a world increasingly ruled by economic integration rather than military coercion. The larger game, Washington's shrinking options. For Trump, the cost of escalation grows exponentially. A military move would violate NATO's core Article 5 principle, triggering a catastrophic alliance crisis. Limited force demonstrations, like symbolic U.S. Air Force landings or demands for missile tracking stations, are currently the extent of Pentagon plans. But the momentum has shifted decisively. Greenland is no longer some remote real estate fantasy. It has become a laboratory of 21st-century resource diplomacy, one driven by multilateral investments, environmental standards, and indigenous sovereignty. The U.S. reflexively wants to dominate. Canada and the EU, by contrast, are playing chess with far more pieces on the board. Greenland, the Arctic's new Pandora's box. Greenland today is not an island for sale. It is the Pandora's box of critical minerals. Whoever controls its development will shape not just Arctic policy, but the future of clean energy, defense manufacturing, and global trade routes. Trump's obsession has backfired. Instead of folding into the American empire, Greenland is now the centerpiece of a Canada-EU-led Arctic economic network. Ottawa and Brussels hold the keys. Washington, for now, can only watch as its rivals capture square after square on the frozen chessboard. The Arctic's ice may still be frozen, but the power game beneath it is boiling.